Welcome into CBS Sports Network for a very busy day of basketball talk. We are on the eve of the NBA draft, but we had some breaking news to start the day, and that is that Dusty May, the reigning national championship coach for Michigan, is leaving college basketball to become the head coach of the Dallas Mavericks. I'm joined by Isaac Trotter and Sam Quinn. And fellas, we got to talk about this right off the bat. Trotter, immediate reaction to this news from you is what?
Stunning. I think the idea that Dallas could come in and poach arguably the best X's and O's coach from college basketball is a pretty big flex. It's interesting to me every time I hear Dusty May talk about offense, he talks about cutting, and unselfishness. It's ironic that he now gets to coach Cooper Flagg, who is one of the best cutters in the NBA, and that is his superpower throughout his career. Just a magnificent rise for Dusty May. Florida Atlantic takes them to the Final Four, heads to Michigan, wins the title. Now you're the coach of the Dallas Mavericks. It's insane. And there are ripple effects everywhere, both for the NBA draft, what the Mavs do at 9, what Michigan's roster looks like, who does Michigan hire at the last second. It's magnificent. And there's going to be a huge impact throughout the sport. And the ripple effects of it too, it's one of those type of seismic moves at this point on the eve of the NBA draft that you're kind of thought might happen, but still when it actually pops, it's pretty inspiring.
Sam, I just got wind of this last night. I'm somewhat skeptical that this means that now the Mavericks are automatically going to draft one of the Michigan guys, and we will get into this later on. But how much say do you think someone like Dusty May gets right off the bat in a front office that is led by Masai Ujiri and has Mike Schmitz presumably calling the shots on draft day?
Yeah, this isn't Masai Ujiri's first rodeo, right? I don't think he's going to let a first-year coach dictate exactly who they're going to pick. I think the big rumor around Dallas throughout the draft process has been that they really loved Brayden Burries from Arizona. I suspect that if Brayden Burries is on the board, that's going to be their likeliest pick. But if he's not, there have also been rumors about Dallas moving down with Oklahoma City at 12 and 17 being the likely trade up target. So if you move down to 12, suddenly you're in a little bit more of a sensible position to take one of these Michigan guys. If that's going to be the case, my next question becomes, how healthy is Derek Lively? He only played 7 games last year. He had that foot injury. Would you maybe look at Mara at that point? I think Yaxel and Morris are a little bit more sensible fits if Lively is going to be healthy. So, I mean, that's something that we're probably not going to know until they're on the clock. But I think if they move down, that makes a Michigan guy a little bit more likely.
Trotter, last point from me. Michigan better move quick here because they've got a roster full of guys that everyone else in college basketball is ready to poach. Elliot Cadeau, Trey McKinney coming back in the backcourt. Mustafa Cham, JP Estrella coming in the front court. To me, this is pretty simple. I just said this on HQ. Mike Boynton is a former high major head coach. He was Cade Cunningham's head coach at Oklahoma State. He's there on staff. If they knew this was happening, they can elevate him right away, try and keep the staff and the roster intact. I think the other option that is being thrown around right now is Billy Donovan because he is on the open market. And this would presumably have to be a decision that happens very quickly from Ward Manuel.
Yeah, and players have 15 days to enter the transfer portal after that new coach is hired. But the thing is, right now in college basketball, there are not a lot of open roster spots and there's not a lot of money. I think there's a real chance that, yes, Michigan has really talented guys, but if they hit free agency, I think they could be taking a discount to transfer to somewhere else. That doesn't mean they couldn't, though, right? Arizona could use another front court piece in a big way after losing Koa Pete to the NBA draft. Texas Tech's roster is still very much in flux. LSU's roster is still very much in flux, and Will Wade has been known to bend the rules and use money in any way he can to build a team that he thinks can contend. So there's a couple teams right there. We'll dig into it a little bit more, but there's no doubt that those guys are going to have options here in the next days because they're all needle movers. My expectation as of this point is for them to stay at Michigan just because the money they'll have at Michigan is better than paying the buyout to then hit free agency again to try to take kind of the scraps of the market right now.
All right, let's talk about the NBA draft because guess what? That's 24 hours away as well. Guys, we still have the Wizards on the clock for number 1. Sam, question for you. Did you see AJ Dybantsa's tweet yesterday or post on X thanking his father for his journey and notice that it was outside the White House in Washington? Like, did you read into that at all if you saw it?
No, but I think these Northeast teams do have an advantage as far as workouts and visits before the NBA draft goes. The Knicks, the Sixers, the Nets, just because the draft is in Brooklyn. So if you are geographically based in one of those cities, like DC is only what, a 90-minute train ride from New York, less. So if he was taking a last second trip to Washington, that wouldn't surprise me. I didn't really read into that. I think right now the buzz is that Washington genuinely hasn't made up their mind. It reminds me of the 2022 draft, I believe it was, when Orlando was linked to Jabari Smith throughout the entire process, pulls a fast one, drafts Paolo Banchero at the last second. This could go either way. I'm trying not to read into things. I think the Wizards are taking as much time as they possibly can to make up their mind.
Guys, I'm going to consolidate top three as quickly as I can here, so then we can move on to stuff that we haven't already discussed at length. I think the Wizards' choice is Dybantsa or Peterson. The Jazz at number 2, they then have a choice. If the Wizards go with Peterson at 1, I think Dybantsa is the pick at 2. That's what all my intel has told me. If they go with Dybantsa at 1, then the choice is Boozer or Peterson. And I think, again, there is no clear sign yet of what Utah would do in that scenario. Now, if you're Memphis at number 3, you're essentially debating between whichever prospect is left, Boozer or Peterson versus Caleb Wilson. In that case, I think regardless of who it is, the choice is the former. You're going to end up with Boozer or Peterson. I think Memphis would actually prefer Boozer. He fits their culture and their preferences that they've had from a draft philosophy. But however you slice it, I think we're now in a point where those 3 guys are off the board 1 through 3. To me, that's a fitting conclusion to this draft because those 3 have been the guys. They have been the big 3 coming into this year. They were the big 3 in high school basketball. So I think the fact that it's still debatable now, just less than 24 hours before the draft, is a fitting chapter to this story that's going to continue to play out. I want to talk now about Chicago at 4 because the perception is that they have an easy pick. It's just going to be Caleb Wilson, and I don't have any arguments with that. But what I can tell you is that they have worked out a ton of guys. Darius Acuff, Keaton Wagler, Mikel Brown, Kingston Flemings. They are also, like Memphis, both Chicago and Memphis, are rumored to be interested in another top 10 pick. So, Sam, I will go to you first. My question is, have you heard similar things about Memphis at 3 and Chicago at 4, both being interested in acquiring a second top 10 pick? And what do you think? Well, I'll leave it open-ended to you in that front.
Yeah, I think it makes sense for both Chicago and Memphis, especially Memphis, to trade back into the top 10 if that trade is available. Memphis obviously traded back up for Cedric Coward from 16 to 11 last year, and that trade worked wonders for them. They have all of this extra draft capital from having traded Desmond Bane and Jaren Jackson over the last year. If they wanted to move back up, whether it's 12 to Oklahoma City, maybe 9 to Dallas, they have the ammunition to do it. I think Chicago is in a little bit, they don't quite have that same draft surplus. They do control their own picks. They also have quite a bit of cap flexibility, though. So maybe an avenue for them to move up would be taking on a bad contract. I think Memphis is a little bit likelier. As far as the number 4 pick, if it's not Caleb Wilson, I would have to say they're probably trading down, with Brooklyn at number 6 being the obvious trade up candidate because that's another team with a really massive draft surplus. Of course, the Nets have had back-to-back very disappointing lotteries, so maybe they'd be willing to pay a haul to jump up to number 4, but I think all indications at this point are that Caleb Wilson is probably going to be the number 4 pick.
Yeah, let me be clear about that. I think if Boozer's on the board at 3, he's the pick. If not, it's Peterson. And at 4, it's Wilson. I think in addition to those picks, Chicago and Memphis are both looking to add another top 10 pick. The theory being, given the surplus of point guards that could be available, if you can pair Boozer with a lead guard, someone like Keaton Wagler, I'm told, would be Memphis's priority. If they could get to 5, that would be an ideal scenario for them. They have 16, 32, and as you mentioned, additional draft assets. Chicago, as you mentioned, doesn't have the same future assets, but does own their own pick, and I'm told they, too, like the idea of taking Caleb Wilson and pairing him with one of these lead guards moving forward. Trotter, to you quickly, any particular duos, if I said to you, hey, Memphis gets Cam Boozer, which is the point guard that you would think would fit best with him?
Well, Cam Boozer just makes everybody better. So I think Mikel Brown Jr., I think would be an awesome fit next to him, right? Get a little bit of floor spacing, can also play Mikel on the ball, get some Cam Boozer on the ball, and Mikel could space off him. I think that would work really well. But I think one point with Chicago that I've been hearing, I think Chicago wants to move up from 15 a little bit just so they could get access to one of the bigs. Thiago Splitter, there's been some talk about trying to get Splitter a big now that they have it. And if you look at that 15 slot, there's a big tier break, right? Hannes Steinbach could be gone. Daimara could be gone. Morez Johnson could be gone. So when we talk about duos, you think about if the Bulls could move up from 15 to maybe 11 or 12 and have a chance to pair Caleb Wilson and Morez Johnson together, that would be an incredible duo together to potentially raise your floor defensively from the jump with a chance to kind of coalesce into something really, really nasty down the road.
Yeah, there's also some real speculation that Thiago Splitter, depending on how much say he gets in that room, a lot like Dusty May in Dallas, is a big fan of Steinbach. So these are some of the things that you can find right now. One more note from me. My updated mock is live, or at least it's going to be very shortly on CBSSports.com, and you can find all of this intel in there. Don't go anywhere. We're coming right back. The Clippers are on the clock, and we're going to talk about all of those scenarios next, right here on the CBS Sports Network. Welcome back to the CBS Sports Network, where we are breaking down the scenarios for all the teams drafting the lottery on Tuesday night. Guys, this draft has been perceived to start at number 5 for quite a while now, and I still think that is at least the second iteration of this draft. If we are to believe that Dybantsa, Boozer, Peterson, and Wilson are off the board 1 through 4 in some order, likely with Wilson going 4, the Clippers really have the first major domino here. Now, I have mocked since the very beginning that Keaton Wagler would be that player. In recent days, there has been a lot of Mikel Brown chatter, but most recently, I'm told even this morning that momentum has since stopped because of concerns about his durability, and that Wagler now is most likely to be the pick. Simultaneously, though, Sam, I think you alluded to this, the Clippers are still believed to be entertaining trade options. Obviously, with the Kawhi Leonard investigation still going on, there's the potential for them to lose additional draft assets down the road. And if they can get their guy or get a guy they're happy with and add another asset, whether it's this year or in future years, that would have to be something they would contemplate. Sam, do you have anything else that you can shed some light on what the Clippers may be doing, or at least prioritizing relative to their balance sheet here?
Well, they check all of the trade down boxes, right? I mean, they're getting younger. They're trying to accumulate assets. Yeah, the Shai Gilgeous-Alexander trade is ending with this year's draft, but then they own control over their next 3 first-round picks from the James Harden trade. Oklahoma City has swap rights with them in 2027. Also has the number 12 and 17 picks. If the Thunder want to move up, they are a very logical trade partner here. If it's not a trade down, or if it's not a trade down, I maybe with Oklahoma City, maybe with somebody else, this is a tricky draft for them because their one long-term core player on this team is probably Darius Garland, who's a point guard. All of these prospects in this range are point guards. If they don't want to draft a point guard, a way to avoid doing so is by trading down. But if they are staying at number 5, the 2 names that have been the buzziest have been Wagler and Brown. So I would suspect that it is one of those guys at number 5. But the Clippers are pretty flexible here. Whether they trade down or not, their balance sheet is relatively clean. They can create cap space this offseason if they want to. A possible Kawhi Leonard trade is still looming over this offseason. And I would watch out for what happens with Giannis Antetokounmpo today, because if he does not get traded to Miami, I would assume Miami's pivot would be to Kawhi Leonard.
All right. Very interesting stuff. We're going to have more on Giannis coming up next. Let's go to 6. Trotter, the Nets are on the clock. Now, my contention is if Wagler goes 5, the Nets now have to choose between Darius Acuff or Mikel Brown. What complicates this is I'm told both didn't have necessarily completely clean medicals. Is there any scenario? There's been rumors of Nate Ament here. That's cooled a little bit. This is the first real mention you hear of maybe a Daimara's on the board. Wagler canceled his workout there, so I think the chances are that he feels pretty good that he's going to be off the board. What do you think would make the most sense for the Nets here?
I don't think you can go wrong with either Acuff or Mikel Brown Jr. I think it's one of those two guys. The longer this process has gone, the more I've thought about moving Mikel Brown Jr. ahead of Darius Acuff in my point guard pecking order. We just did an exercise on CBSSports.com where they asked us to rank those four guards, and I ended up doing that. I think Mikel Brown's vertical explosiveness is kind of that last piece that I don't necessarily see on Darius Acuff's film. That's the differentiator for me. Brown's ability to, one, obviously, I think he's a better shooter than Acuff straight up, even though Acuff shot better than him last year. And two, that vertical explosiveness at the rim just kind of gives him that one extra, kind of cherry on top of the portfolio here. So I don't think you could go wrong with either, but I think Brown's upside at his size, shooting, passing, playmaking, is just a little too tantalizing to pass up. Earlier in the week, I had Acuff mocked here at 6 for the Nets. I've changed my mind. I think Mikel Brown is the most likely pick here at 6.
Sam, two-part question for me. There's speculation that Brooklyn is at least contemplating the implications of taking a point guard because they took 2 last year in Ben Seraph and Nolan Traore. There's also reports that Sacramento really wants Darius Acuff, and that Acuff in turn would be very happy with the move to Sacramento. I also think it's worth noting that not every lottery pick is enthusiastic about a move to Sacramento. So is there a world in which these two just flip 6 and 7 and the Kings say, hey, you know what? Darius Acuff is our guy. We're not going to risk Brooklyn taking him. And Brooklyn says, you know what? We're not really too keen on taking another point guard here at 6 anyway. So let's flip back, even if it's just a pick, see what else we can get in exchange for this. That seems logical. I've heard some speculation on that. How likely might that be here in the next 24 hours?
I think it's a very high stakes game of chicken, right? Because the last thing you want if you're the Nets at number 6 with really no locked in cornerstone players on your roster is to draft somebody you don't want in the hopes of baiting the Kings to trade for him, right? So I think when push comes to shove, when they're on the clock, if the Kings haven't made them an offer to move up, I suspect they're just going to take whoever they want, whether that's Acuff or not. You're right. It is rare for a prospect to want to go to Sacramento. I think if you're Darius Acuff and you're somebody whose future really relies on being an offensive superstar, somebody who's going to have the ball in his hands constantly, getting to Sacramento makes some sense because that roster is in such a teardown position. The Nets are as well. But like you said, they did draft those point guards last year. I wouldn't look at those point guards as guys blocking anybody with this particular pick at number 6 because none of them have shown enough to make you believe, oh yeah, these guys are sacred. They're absolutely part of our foundation. If the best player on your board is a point guard, just take a point guard.
Well, and I think the Kings are probably the most likely team to take a point guard. When you look at their roster of all the teams drafting between 5 and 8, I think they are the one that has the most glaring hole at the point. However, the other thing that I have heard speculated about is if they can't get to Acuff or Acuff is not available at 7, that they too have trade down scenarios. And it would put them in a position where maybe they're looking back for some more size. Dybantsa and Nate Ament have also been mentioned here. So the Kings, a possibility to trade up with Brooklyn, also a possibility to trade down. Want to talk about the Hawks now. And Sam, I will come back to you because the Hawks made a trade last night. They got Aaron Wiggins from OKC. They moved him into some cap space. You'll describe this much more accurately than I will. But for 2 second-round picks, I was under the impression they were going to take a point guard or a big man with this pick anyway. There were trade down discussions that I heard rumored about. People like Chicago and Memphis who were interested in a second top 10 pick. OKC potentially looking to move up. Given that they just made a deal with OKC, should we now assume that they are not going to swap out for OKC's 2 picks in the middle of the first round?
I would just view this Aaron Wiggins trade as opportunistic. He has one of the best contracts in the NBA. He's under contract, I believe, for 3 more years at less than $10 million a year. They could just fit him into a pre-existing trade exception. So they didn't even have to use their mid-level to bring in Aaron Wiggins. He only cost 2 second-round picks. And rotation wings are just really rare. So I don't think that this trade really affects their draft plans. It was just a good asset to get for them at a reasonable price. If they wanted to move down, I do think that would still be on on the table for them. I also wouldn't be surprised. There's been some buzz around New Orleans potentially trying to trade into the top 10 with Nate Ament as the likely candidate, it seems, or at least the one that checks the Troy Weaver box of having come from the DMV. Atlanta and New Orleans obviously made that trade last year where Atlanta traded the pick that became Derek Queen to get New Orleans' unprotected pick. Could the Pelicans put future unprotected picks on the table if they wanted to get up to number 8? Could they put Trey Murphy on the table, one of the most desirable wing candidates out there on the market on a very team-friendly contract? He would obviously help Atlanta's shooting, which has been a problem for them over the last year, especially with Dyson Daniels being so prominent in their starting lineup. I do think there are still a lot of trade considerations here. I just don't look at Aaron Wiggins as somebody who says anything one way or another. I think they just thought, this is a good value trade. We're going to make it, and then we'll deal with the draft pick afterward.
All right, fair enough. Trotter, second piece of intel from me that I've heard about Atlanta, and I will follow this up with a question. I'm told that Quinn Snyder would prefer Adai Mara. 2 years ago, it was pretty known that he preferred Donovan Clingan. Atlanta drafted Zachary Reese-Shea, and Reese-Shea, the number 1 overall pick in the draft a couple years ago, was virtually unplayable in the playoff series against the Knicks. That kind of, I think, has added a little ammunition to Quinn Snyder, and he wants a big, like a very legitimate size in the middle. Adai Mara, someone who could offer some offensive creativity and simultaneously protect the rim. If they keep the pick and it comes down to a guard, maybe someone who's got some durability issues, versus a big man in Mara who's got some conditioning issues, there's question about how many minutes he could play. Do you have a preference there in terms of how they should think about using this spot?
The more I've done the mock draft exercise, the more there's just not a guard that I like at 23. If they take so I think that taking a guard at 8 actually makes more sense because it's kind of like a 2x2 game in my head. It's like, do I like Kingston Flemings, the combination of Kingston Flemings at 8 and a Henry Vesar at 23, or do I like the Adai Mara at 8 with the combination of maybe a Buka Corey at 23, or maybe like a LeBaron Philon if he drops, or maybe Bennett Sturts? Like, that's kind of the machinations you're trying to play out in your head as you try to game this whole process out. There's no doubt, though, you can talk yourself into either outcome of it because I think Adai Mara changes the geography on the floor more than anybody in this draft. Teams attempted a shot at the rim at just 23% of the time against Michigan when Mara was on the floor. That's one of the most ludicrous numbers I've seen in this draft, in this pre-draft process. But Kingston, I think taking Kingston Flemings at 8, 1, gets you your point guard of the future, and 2, kind of covers you a little bit because there's probably not another guard at 23 that you could slot into your rotation next year.
All right, interesting stuff. We're coming right back. Dallas has a new coach, and they've got a lot of options here with the number 9 pick. That's next, right here on the CBS Sports Network. Welcome back to the CBS Sports Network for what has already been a busy day of news, and we are still on the Giannis Antetokounmpo watch. Let's, guys, get back to number 9. The Mavs made the big splash of the morning by hiring Dusty May away from the Michigan Wolverines, and now the question is, will that impact what they do on draft night? I am of the opinion that it won't. I know that Morez Johnson, Yaxel Lendeborg, Adai Mara are all within this range. The prospect that I have had them linked to from the very beginning, though, is Brayden Burries. He is still my pick here, but I will add, I do think that this is I know that this is an organization that has done a lot of due diligence on numerous point guards. And now, as we get closer to the draft, I think there are more scenarios where you start to look at the possibility that one of those guys could slip, especially if there are concerns about the medical. So is Brayden Burries still the pick if maybe Mikel Brown is on the board? Is he still the pick if maybe Kingston Flemings is on the board? That to me is going to be very, very interesting. So Sam, my question to you right off the bat, 2-part. I know you answered this. Do you expect this to increase the likelihood that they take a kid from Michigan? And am I right to believe the reports that right now Masai Ujiri is committed to Kyrie Irving at the point guard position, at least for the foreseeable future?
I never tend to believe what executives say or what those reports are. I mean, if you look back to during this season, I know Mark Cuban isn't a decision maker in Dallas anymore, still a minority owner. He came out pretty strongly and said, we are not trading Anthony Davis. And what did they do? They traded Anthony Davis. I think the reality with Kyrie Irving is that if they get a good offer, they will trade him. If they don't get a good offer, they won't. This might also be a situation where they want to reestablish his value on the court after he missed all of last season, where they could bring him back for the first half of the season, see what he looks like, try to increase his value a little bit before flipping him at the deadline. But I don't think there are any illusions here, right? Kyrie Irving is 34, coming off of a torn ACL. Cooper Flagg is, just came off of one of the best teenage seasons that any player has ever had in NBA history. I don't think they're going to let Kyrie Irving affect who they pick here. It's going to be the guy who they think is going to be the best player next to Cooper Flagg 3, 4, 5, 6 years down the line. As far as whether or not Dusty May affects this pick, again, I do think it really comes down to, are they staying at number 9 or are they moving down? Probably with Oklahoma City at 12 and 17. But depending on the package, considering they don't control their own first round pick between 2027 and 2030, if Memphis wanted to blow them away with future draft capital, the Mavericks could kind of recover all of that lost draft capital in one fell swoop. The Grizzlies are rich enough to do that for them, depending on what the offer is. So if they were to move down, maybe then one of those Michigan guys makes a little bit more sense. But I think if they're at 9, Burries, or maybe if one of the point guards falls, is probably their likeliest outcome.
Trotter, if you're Dusty May and you walk into that room, are you trying to convince the new front office or your new bosses basically to take one of your guys over Brayden Burries or let's say it's Mikel Brown or Kingston Flemings?
I don't think I would, because I've heard Dusty May just rave about Brayden Burries. Like, he just loves Brayden Burries as well. So I think that's a certain part of it. As soon as this happened, though, my first thought was, could they get 12 and 17 from OKC, move for 9, right? Move back to 12, take Merez and Cooper Flagg together is just like a problem defensively. Those two guys on the same floor are going to be flying around super high energy. I think Dusty obviously loves Merez Johnson and raved about him to anybody and everybody whenever he got the chance. But then again, at 17, that have a chance to, again, add another potential difference maker that put him right in the thick of the guard market. You could get a Bennett Sturtz there, who I think would certainly help them. You could get a Phylon there who could help them. A Corey, certainly in that range. Maybe a Christian Anderson if he gets past Memphis. So I think the idea of maybe getting to move back to 12 and 17 to add 2 players to this rotation would certainly be interesting, because we know Dusty May is certainly going to have a real pulse of these college guys because he scouted them so much and prepared for them in such a high level.
Sam, as of right now, Dusty May is the biggest news of the day, but there is extreme potential for that not to last through the end of the day, because we are on Giannis Antetokounmpo trade watch. The Bucks kind of self-imposed the draft day deadline. They are up at number 10, and I just believe what they do here depends on what happens with this Giannis trade. What can you tell us as of this moment when we are recording is the perceived latest here?
Boston and Miami are the 2 teams that are really in the thick of it. I wouldn't rule out a mystery team. The Bucks tend to move pretty quietly with things like this. Miles Turner last year kind of came out of nowhere. Damian Lillard a few years ago did as well. The Bucks tend to be pretty good at minimizing leaks, or at least moving in silence when it comes to big transactions. So I wouldn't rule out a mystery team, but right now the latest seems to be it's either Miami or Boston. They've known what Miami is offering for quite some time. They're not going to put Bam Adebayo on the table. It's going to be something centered around the number 13 pick, future draft capital, and then players like Tyler Hero, Khalil Ware, Jaime Jaquez, maybe a couple of those other younger guys on their bench. For Boston, it would be Jaylen Brown centric. And the question would be, on top of Jaylen Brown, what else is Boston willing to put in? Jaylen probably gets them most of the way, but could Milwaukee extract a Hugo Gonzalez out of that? Could they get the number 27 overall pick? Could they get some of Boston's future draft capital? And they could trade picks in the 2030s if they really wanted to. If I were Milwaukee, without knowing what the lottery rules are going to be after 2029, I would really like to get my hands on one of Boston's picks, say 2031, 2033, something like that. So right now, Boston and Miami, I would say Boston probably has the inside track if they are willing to put a lot on top of Jaylen Brown. If not, Miami's been the favorite pretty much since the get-go.
And here's my thing. Like, if you're Boston, and this is so public now that Jaylen Brown is on the block, like, it's like, you better pull this off, or you better find another home for Jaylen Brown. Otherwise, that podcast is going to be out of control next year. So Trotter, my question to you, let's say this deal goes through, Giannis is not on the Bucks, and they are in some form of rebuilding, whether it's, hey, Jaylen Brown's here and we're going to try and compete for the playoffs, or whether it's we're taking the Miami deal and we're starting from scratch. There's been a lot of speculation that Nate Ament could be their guy. The Bucks ownership is tied to the University of Tennessee because they're significant boosters. Whether or not that matters on draft day, we could tell. But what would you think of let me phrase it like this. These are the prospects that I had been told. The Bucks would love it if a point guard got to them. I'm not sure the chances of that. Ament, we talked about. Steinbach or Morris Johnson seem to be the other options for Milwaukee. Are there any of those that you would like best in either a complete rebuild or a Jaylen Brown-centric team?
I like the idea of trying to see if I can help Nate Ament reach his max capacity. I think he's got a pretty high floor as a prospect. This is maybe a hot take, but I thought his defensive tape last year was really good. Some people would argue with that. I think defense is his way to make an impact early in his career. But obviously he's enormous with touch out to the 3-point stripe. That kind of coalesces and combines into being a pretty high floor type of prospect, even though he's got a ways to go, right? The handle certainly has to improve. I think the way he bends and the way he moves is going to certainly have to improve a little bit. Can you help him get there? I think talking myself into Ament at 10, saying, hey, this is a guy that guarded Darryn Peterson as well as anybody at the high school ranks a year ago, as a guy that was a number 4 recruit in the process last time. At this time, we're taking a shot at him at 10. Could he be like Amadas Buzelis, who kind of outplays his draft slot? I think that makes the most sense to me at 10 for a rebuild or a retool under a new look Bucks roster.
And guys, I'm going to skip the Warriors at 11 and OKC at 12 here, only because it makes sense to tie Milwaukee to Miami. Miami right now has the 13th pick, and prospects that are believed to appeal to both, meaning the Heat would be happy to have them if they don't make a deal, and Milwaukee is known to at least be doing some due diligence, if not be fond of them. Guys like Steinbach, guys like Morris Johnson, guys like LeBaron Philon, all three of those check both boxes. Miami would be happy to have them. Milwaukee seems intrigued if a deal with the Heat does come to fruition. So those outcomes for the Bucks at 10 and the Heat at 13 are certainly intertwined as we figure out exactly what's going to happen in the Giannis Antetokounmpo sweepstakes. Don't go anywhere. We've got more intel coming up right here on the CBS Sports Network. Welcome back to the CBS Sports Network, where we are talking about all of the options on the table for the teams that draft in the lottery. Now, Sam, 24 hours ago, I thought the chances of Adai Mara slipping back to the Warriors were looking better and better. This morning, I think those chances have decreased because of the potential that some of these point guards are slipping due to their medicals. If the point guards slip, it means somebody's got to rise, and I think Mara, maybe along with Nate Ament, probably have the best chance to rise. Mara would be an obvious fit to the Warriors. They've also worked out guys like Yaxel Lendeborg, and then they had a recent workout. Brayden Burries, Bennett Sturts, LeBaron Philon, and Cameron Carr were all in this week. Other possibilities, Morris Johnson and Kareem Lopez. Anything in particular that really stands out for you that the Warriors could be looking for here?
Well, I mean, the first thought here is, are they going to trade this pick for a veteran? There has not been that much noise lately on Kawhi Leonard, but that was the player that they had been linked to most prominently going back to the deadline. Him and Giannis Antetokounmpo. The Giannis rumors with Golden State have since mostly slowed. So if they are drafting here, I think they could go in almost any direction because you are balancing the present with the future, right? The priority for them does seem to be, can we put a competitive team around Stephen Curry and Draymond Green while they're still maybe not in their primes, but still playing it close to the level where it'll take to be competitive in the playoffs. I do look at Yaxel Lendeborg as one of the older prospects, somebody who could come in right away and potentially be a starter. Somebody who also can switch across several positions, which has been a trademark for the Warriors defensively under Draymond Green, basically for the last decade. But I do think this is going to be a best prospect available sort of situation. I don't think there's a single need that they're going to look at and and say, we have to fill this via the number 11 pick. They are still looking into every other manner of possible veteran acquisition. They've been linked to LeBron. I think that is going to depend on what else the Lakers do and how much the Lakers are willing to offer him. But if you're asking me who I think the best fit here is, I really love that Yaxel fit in Golden State. He seems like the perfect guy to come into that switch everything defensive system and be able to contribute right away.
I mean, the Bennett Sturts fit would just be pretty clear too, although I don't know that they have to take him at 11. Trotter, want to ask you about OKC. We've already speculated on a variety of deals they could make to consolidate their picks at 12 and 17. I think punting those assets off to the future and trying to save those salary spots are also an option. We saw them move off of Aaron Wiggins last night. They also have options. They have options on Lou Dort and Isaiah Hartenstein. Sam, real quick, am I correct in assuming that they are going to either want to pick up the Hartenstein option or renegotiate a longer-term contract at a manageable number? Is that a fair assumption for us to operate under?
Yeah, I think that it'll be the latter. I think he has that $28.5 million team option. I would expect them to come to a new long-term deal that slightly lowers the average annual value, but gives him several more years, maybe something in the range of 3 years for 75, 4 years for 100. You're just trying to shave a little bit off of that salary for this year, because then if you trade Lou Dort and then you trade Isaiah Joe, you can duck the second apron while keeping Isaiah Hartenstein. We saw how essential he was against Victor Wembanyama in the Western Conference Finals. I would be stunned if he's not back in some capacity.
Yeah, a versatile defender with a Wemby-proof floater is somebody that OKC needs to reinvest in. Sam, Trotter, you heard Sam mention there that Lou Dort and Isaiah Joe could also be on the way out. Aaron Wiggins is also on the way out, or is now already in Atlanta. That leads me to think that they may need to rebuild some depth on the wing here. Someone like Yaxel could be a possibility. I've also heard them linked to Dalen Swain. Nate Ament has been someone who's worked out here. If he slips, Morris Johnson is more of a big, obviously, but he seems to fall in line with the type of players they've drafted over the years. There's a lot of optionality here for Sam Presti, and no one understands how to utilize all the tools at his disposal better than the OKC GM. Do you have a favorite scenario here for the Thunder?
My favorite scenario is to trade up to 9 and add Brayden Burries to this mix. I think Burries fits everything of what they look for in their prospects. I think the pass, dribble, shoot aspect of Burries is terrific. His defense, his rebounding, his offensive rebounding for a guard is good. His ability to play with pace, I think he would just kind of fit seamlessly into their culture as well. If they stick at 12 and 17, I like the idea of adding Morez Johnson at 12 and Dalen Swain at 17. Morez combined with a Thomas Sorber, that's as your backups behind Chet Holmgren, Jalen Williams, and Isaiah Hartenstein. That's a formidable front court that's really deep and has a lot of playable options. And then Swain, he is a drive and kick wing, and that is what OKC plays at a very high level. I think Swain is ready-made to play NBA minutes next year. So at 17, you get a cheap rotation filler who could be your 8th or 9th man that fits schematically really well what OKC wants to do. It would make a whole lot of sense.
There's a similar philosophy about what Charlotte may do at 14 and 18. And the thought is that they might get a big with one pick and a guard with the other. They have probably the most affordable center tandem in the league right now. Miles Bridges, we'll see if he can stick long-term as the four-man. So there's a sense they could look for front court reinforcements. They've been linked to Morez Johnson. When I mocked him to Charlotte coming out of the combine, that was viewed as aggressive. Now it's a real possibility he's not even available when they come up at 14. They've also been connected with guys like Allen Graves. Koa Pete has been in, although I suspect he would be more of an option at 18. And then the guards are Christian Anderson, Bennett Sturts, and Dalen Swain is again someone here who we start to be mentioning his name more and more, would give them a defensive-minded perimeter player to complement the shot making of guys like Con Kneppel, LaMelo Ball, Brandon Miller. Sam, outside of just making the pick straight up, is there any trade wins about Charlotte or anything we need to know about their books which could influence the decision making on Tuesday?
Yeah, the Hornets are pretty flexible financially. If they wanted to take a big swing, they could. I mean, a rumor that's kind of made the rounds is Minnesota working out LeBaron Philon. I don't think LeBaron Philon's going to make it to number 28. Now, does that mean that they have to trade all the way up to 14 or 18 to get him? I don't know. But when it looked like Minnesota might be in the Giannis sweepstakes, maybe there would have been something where you turn Rudy Gobert into a draft pick that you send to Milwaukee. I don't know if that's quite as likely, but I do think Charlotte, having come off of, they were the number 9 seed in the Eastern Conference last year, but that wasn't really indicative of how good they were. They had the best offensive rating in the NBA after January 1st. They start 4-14, but they're gangbusters from there. So I do assume that if there is a chance for them to turn one of these picks into a veteran for their front court, that is something that they would consider.
I'm glad you mentioned the LeBaron Philon workout in Minnesota, because that's not a workout that I think his representation would have accepted unless they had enough evidence to suggest that the Timberwolves were looking to move up. So that was the operating assumption that most were operating off of yesterday. And I think a lot of us were trying to connect the dots and thought that, okay, that could be tied to the Giannis sweepstakes. Now it sounds like Minnesota is a distant third in the Giannis sweepstakes. Do we still think there could be a move for them to make outside of Giannis heading into the Tuesday's draft?
Well, what I watch is that Rob Dillingham trade 2 years ago, where Minnesota trades up to number 8 overall by using future draft capital. It was a 2031 unprotected pick and a 2030 top 1 protected swap. Tim Conley is as aggressive as NBA GMs get. They do have access to their 2033 first round pick now. I wonder if they're going to say, let's do a do-over on the Rob Dillingham trade, take another shot at a possible guard to pair with Anthony Edwards. Could we use that 2033 pick to trade up and get Philon or one of these other guards? That's something that I would watch. I do think Minnesota is going to be active one way or another. I've called them the hokey pokey team of the offseason. You either got to put your right foot in, get more aggressive, add more, because they're not good enough to compete with Oklahoma City and San Antonio right now, or you got to take your left foot out and trade some of these older guys like Randall and Gobert, recenter the team around the younger guys, maybe play Baron J a little bit more next year, get a younger prospect in the door. I think it's got to be one or the other.
That's amazing. I have nothing to add to that. I would just like to encourage our producers to cut that and get it on social media right away. Phenomenal stuff from Sam Quinn there doing the hokey pokey. All right, we're going to be back with one final shot. Thanks as always to Isaac Trotter and Sam Quinn. You can find them on CBSSports.com. They're the best at what they do. Trotter's got you covered in college basketball. Sam, with everything you need to know about the NBA draft. I'll be right back. You're watching the CBS Sports Network. Welcome back to the CBS Sports Network. Just wanted to add a little context on that pursuit of Minnesota into a guard. We talked about the Robert Dillingham experiment. Obviously, it didn't go well, but there is evidence that the Timberwolves are interested in that archetype once again. They have worked out LeBaron Philon. As we said, that is indicative that they are exploring opportunities to move up in the draft. The Timberwolves are also viewed as the potential floor for Ibuka Okori, another somewhat undersized playmaking lead guard who could add another creator next to Anthony Edwards. Those are two more things to watch before the lottery. Final point, keep an eye on the Pelicans looking to move up into the lottery right now. They do not have a pick after last year's trades that brought them Derek Queen and Fears, but they are looking to add someone else. Nate Ament has been someone that has been speculated about because of Troy Weaver's familiarity with him. We are just getting started with a draft coverage. In fact, in an hour, you got time to go grab a sandwich, have your lunch, then come back right here. CBS Sports Network, we are breaking down my latest mock draft. We talked about the scenarios here. We are going with my predictions in an hour, and then all night long, we've got coverage on CBS Sports HQ. That leads to our full coverage of the draft live both tomorrow and Wednesday on CBS Sports HQ. So it is going to be a busy 2 or 3 days of action here. And remember, we remain on Giannis Antetokounmpo watch. Dusty May headline has already happened. We're expecting another major headline in the world of basketball before tomorrow night's lottery. And then it is a historic draft. You can find all of this content over at the CBS Sports College Basketball YouTube page. And then on Thursday, we will be back here on the CBS Sports Network to wrap up what happened in a historic 2026 NBA draft.